Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a time when bedtime wasn't just about brushing your teeth and scrolling until your eyes give up. No, if you were a well-mannered Victorian, the hours before sleep were their own bizarre performance. From laced corsets to coded diaries, and from muffled footsteps to vinegar nightcaps, every moment was steeped in rules that seem absolutely upside down today. You won't believe the things they considered relaxing. All right. Before you get too cozy, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe, but only if your heart says yes, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time you're crawling into bed tonight. Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. It all starts in the parlour. The fireplace still glows a soft orange. The scent of coal clings to the velvet curtains, and someone is shuffling a stack of hand-cut cards at the edge of the settee. You're still in your evening clothes, your waistcoat stiff, or your skirt trailing against the carpet, but your host insists, just one little game before bed. It's not just for fun, though. Parlour games in Victorian households aren't the modern kind with flashing lights or cheeky clues. No, these are clever, socially coded pastimes designed to test your wit, your nerve, or your ability to pretend you're not completely exhausted. In some households, a game called Consequences is all the rage, where each guest writes a sentence of a story on folded paper, then passes it on. What begins as polite introductions often ends in deeply silly tales about unexpected marriages and surprise moustaches. In others, you're pulled into something more theatrical. Perhaps it's tableau vivant, living pictures, where you're told to freeze mid-pose, mimicking a classical painting or historical scene, while others guess what it is. You've barely had time to digest your evening pudding, and now you're pretending to be the Venus de Milo, using nothing but a throw pillow and a shawl. Someone snorts. Someone else corrects your elbow angle. There's also the minister's cat, a word game that seems gentle at first. Everyone takes turns describing the minister's cat with an adjective starting with A, then B, then C, until someone forgets the alphabet or accidentally calls the cat repugnant. Instant scandal. But these aren't just games. They're social tests. A single pause too long, a poorly chosen word, a stifled yawn. That's how gossip begins. You hear it in the way Mrs. Hemsley raises an eyebrow when young Mr. Pratt forgets the rules. He always was a bit slow, she whispers, and now that will follow him to Sunday dinner. You laugh politely, careful not to show teeth. Laughter is fine, but too loud, and you'll be labelled uncultured. Too soft and you're cold. One guest dabs at her forehead with a lace handkerchief. Not because she's hot, but because her hair pomade is beginning to melt near the hearth. Just when you think you're off the hook, someone suggests blind man's bluff. You freeze. That's the physical one. The one where someone is blindfolded and stumbles around the room trying to catch another player by sound alone. You've seen it end in disasters. Tea tables overturned, hands accidentally brushed where they shouldn't be, or worse, someone falling into the aspidistra. And yet, here comes the blindfold. You escape just in time. The host claps her hands and declares 10 o'clock, time to wind down. And with that, everyone begins the ritual retreat toward the upstairs hall. You're grateful, but also aware. The evening has only just begun. The parlour clears like a slow, elegant tide receding. You're left clutching your gloves, wondering if you passed tonight's unspoken exams. Were you witty, but not silly? Observant, but not nosy? And did you manage to laugh without revealing anything truly human? The hostess extinguishes the last lamp with a gentle click of the brass snuffer. The glow of the fire dies to a whisper. Up the stairs you go, surrounded by the creak of polished banisters and the rustle of skirts against wallpaper that hasn't been changed since before the railway arrived in town. You're not entirely alone. In front of you, one of the guests is muttering something about a charade that went too far. Apparently someone acted out Romeo and Juliet a bit too convincingly last week, and it caused a minor household scandal. Behind you, the ever-dutiful maid follows at a respectful distance, holding a warming pan in one hand and your folded nightclothes in the other. But your mind is still in the parlour. What is it about these games that leaves you feeling like you've just sat for an exam rather than a celebration? There's something deeply Victorian about it. Even leisure is a performance, and even performance is about restraint. You recall a magazine clipping someone once read aloud during dinner. It claimed that games like Pass the Slipper were meant to teach graceful concealment of the hands, and the laughing game, where one person must not smile while others try to provoke them, was good training for self-control. It all makes sense now. These aren't just amusements. They're rehearsals for adulthood, for dinners with clients, for managing servants without seeming cold, for receiving guests without revealing the exhaustion stitched into your collarbone. The Victorians were endlessly fond of rules, and what better time to reinforce them than when you're already halfway to surrender? You reach the landing and glance back at the parlour, now dark. One cushion still bears the dent of where you sat. A card lies forgotten near the leg of the piano, and in the silence, you think of the one game you were grateful they didn't suggest tonight. Forfeits. That one's dangerous. In forfeits, you must give up a personal item, your glove, your watch fob, even your handkerchief, and perform a task to win it back. A dance, a rhyme, a secret told softly to the group. It seems harmless, until someone dares you to say who you most admire in the room, or worse, to mimic them. You've seen reputations bruised, courtships upended, and once, just once, a betrothal fast-tracked after an overly honest forfeit task. All before bedtime, you find your door and step inside. Behind you, the maid nods wordlessly and disappears down the narrow servant stairs. You close the door gently. The floor is uneven beneath your stockings. The lamp flickers low. Outside, the city is quiet, but your mind is still wide awake, racing through every phrase you said, every glance exchanged, every unspoken rule you might have broken. Welcome to Victorian bedtime, where even your leisure is laced with lace, and sleep has to wait its turn. You light the bedside lamp with a careful flick of the taper, shielding the flame with your palm like you've seen the housekeeper do 100 times. The match hisses, the oil glows amber, and your shadow leaps to life against the wallpaper roses. You've escaped the parlour, survived the gauntlet of social games, and now, finally, it's time to prepare for bed. Or so you thought. Because in a Victorian household, bedtime isn't just about slipping under the sheets. It begins with what can only be described as a very cautious, very inconvenient battle with cleanliness. The wash basin sits in the corner like it's watching you. It's ceramic, cracked slightly at the rim, and filled with lukewarm water that's gone cold since the maid poured it earlier. There is no sink, no running tap, no privacy curtain, just a chipped pitcher, a thin towel, and a bar of soap so dry it could scratch initials into glass. You remove your outer garments piece by piece. Not all the way, of course. Victorians consider full nudity in the bedroom something to be avoided unless you're in hospital, or have very specific instructions from your doctor. So you keep your shift on, roll up your sleeves, and reach for the sponge. Yes, the sponge. Not a luxurious soft sea sponge. This one is rough and smells faintly of carbolic. Dipping it into the water, you try to ignore the sharp gasp that escapes your lips when the cold hits your skin. You dab, not scrub, at the usual spots. Underarms, neck, hands, and maybe your feet, if you're feeling daring. Washing the face is done last, almost ceremonially. You can't splash too much or drip on the rug. Victorian bathrooms are a luxury reserved for the obscenely wealthy. For you, this porcelain basin and the jug beside it are the evening ritual. And the water? It was likely hauled upstairs in pails, one floor at a time, by a teenage scullery maid with arms like iron. You try not to think about that. When you finally towel off, you don't feel cleaned so much as obeyed. You've fulfilled the nightly expectation. It's not about comfort. It's about restraint, order, and visible effort. You lift the chamber pot's porcelain lid with the tip of your fingers. It sits beneath a modest wooden chair disguised with floral fabric, an attempt at elegance, though no one is truly fooled. You sit delicately, knees pressed together, eyes fixed forward, hoping no one hears the faint clink of porcelain beneath you. There's no flush, no plumbing, just the same container that's been used since before dinner, and which someone will empty in the morning. And yes, it smells exactly as you'd expect. This is part of the Victorian bedtime, rituals wrapped in politeness, even when there's nothing polite about them. You return the lid and slide the pot back into place, pretending this never happened. You catch your reflection in the mirror, pale, slightly damp, a little dishevelled. But to the Victorian eye, this is bedtime beauty. Not luminous skin or silky robes, but a properly managed process. You've washed in your way. You've used the chamber pot quietly, and now you're ready for the next obstacle, dressing for sleep. You step away from the basin, towel draped over your shoulder like a prize fighter in a corset. The air in your room has cooled, not from any ventilation, of course, but simply because the fire in the grate was never lit tonight. Coal is expensive, and warmth is not a nightly guarantee. Your nightclothes are waiting, folded with exacting care on the corner of your chair, a linen shift, a cotton wrapper, and if the season calls for it, a pair of woolen bed socks and a flannel cap that looks suspiciously like it once belonged to your grandfather. You slip the shift over your head, smoothing the fabric with your palms. It's stiffer than you'd like, starched from last week's laundry, and tied at the neckline with a ribbon that somehow always gets caught in your hair. Nightwear in the Victorian era is not designed for lounging. It's built for decency, warmth, and survival, especially in households where morning frost appears on the inside of the windows. Once dressed, you face a small but daily dilemma. What to do with a now damp towel and sponge? There's no laundry chute, no hamper. You drape them over the back of the chair, carefully positioned so they don't drip on the rug. The sponge goes back in its basin like a sad sea creature, destined to be reused again tomorrow, and the towel is left to air dry beside the fireplace that isn't lit. The next step? Hair. Victorian hairstyles aren't just decorative, they're architectural. For women, this means long, often thick hair that has been pinned, braided, and oiled into place since morning. For men, it's slicked, centre-parted, and combed with precision. But at night, everything must be carefully undone, and then immediately redone in a more suitable fashion for sleeping. You sit at your dressing table and begin the nightly ritual, unpinning one hairpin after another. There are dozens, possibly hundreds. Each one pulled with a little tug, a little sigh. When your hair finally falls around your shoulders, there's a moment of relief, quickly followed by responsibility. Now comes the brushing. And yes, it must be 100 strokes. You remember this rule from childhood, when your governess warned that if you didn't brush thoroughly, your hair would grow in crooked. You've never figured out what that meant, but the phrase has haunted you enough to keep brushing ever since. You work from ends to roots, careful not to snag, careful not to shed. Loose strands are considered unsightly and are to be collected, rolled into tidy balls and disposed of discreetly, or added to a hair receiver jar on your vanity. You've heard of girls saving enough to make jewellery. By the time you're done, your arm aches. Your hair is braided loosely, oiled with castor or rosemary, and wrapped in a soft cloth to protect the pillowcase. You glance down at your hands, dry, red-knuckled, slightly cracked from the soap. You rub a bit of lanolin on them, the smell sharp and sheepy. Then pull on a pair of cotton gloves meant to preserve feminine softness. This too is part of the nightly choreography. You don't just wash up, you armour up. You aren't going to bed. You're entering a sacred pause between performance and expectation, wrapped in fabric and rules. Now fully prepared, you sit briefly on the edge of your bed. Not in it, not yet. There are still 2 steps to go. A final look around the room, and the ceremonial entry into the strangest bed you've ever seen. The bed waits, tall and still like a ship in dry dock. It rises nearly to your waist, requiring either a small wooden stool or an ungraceful hop to ascend. You opt for the stool tonight, placing one foot carefully on its worn step and grabbing the bedpost for balance. The bed frame is carved from mahogany or walnut, dark, glossy, and unnecessarily intimidating. Every surface gleams with polish, but no amount of shine softens the sheer weight of it. This isn't just a place to sleep, it's a piece of architecture. 4 posters rise like columns from the corners, draped in thick curtains of brocade or damask. You pull one back gently and peer inside. The space within the bed is enclosed. A bit too enclosed, perhaps. The curtains are drawn not just for elegance, but for insulation and modesty. Heat is precious, privacy even more so. Once you're in, and the curtains are closed, you are hidden from view, though not necessarily from sound. Victorian walls are thin. The mattress is stuffed with feathers, but years of use have given it an unpredictable topography. There's a slight dip in the middle, where generations of bodies have settled, and faint rustling sounds when you press your hand down. You've heard whispers of mattresses filled with horsehair, seaweed, or even moss in less fortunate homes. Feather stuffing is a luxury, though it has its quirks. Occasionally a sharp quill decides to poke back. And then there are the sheets. Linen, of course, scrubbed stiff and bleached pale. They're cold to the touch, not chilly, icy. You wince slightly as you fold them back. The room might not feel too bad with your nightclothes on, but those sheets have been lying still for hours. Thankfully, someone's placed a bed warmer under the covers. A long-handled pan with glowing coals inside swished between the sheets before your arrival. The scent of metal and singed cotton still lingers. You pull it out carefully and set it on the hearth tile to cool. No one wants to repeat what happened to Cousin Edith last Christmas when the bed warmer leaked and scorched the entire underside of the counterpane. The embroidery never recovered. Sliding into bed is a task requiring both bravery and technique. You climb in slowly, like a soldier entering enemy territory. Knees first, then elbow, then a full-bodied slide into the hollow. The sheets cling, not from moisture, but from the sheer friction of starched fabric and flannel nightwear. Once in position, you draw the heavy counterpane up to your chin and reach for the curtains, pulling them closed around you with a gentle swoosh. Instantly the air changes. It's darker, yes, but also quieter. The curtains muffle the sounds of the house, the creak of the stairs, the rattle of a window panes, the wind brushing against slate rooftops. It's like being inside a padded drawer. You try not to think about the fact that dust gathers up here more than anywhere else. The fringe on the canopy above you sways slightly. With each breath, and somewhere, possibly in the footboard, you hear a faint scuttle. A mouse? A beetle? You hope it's just the wind. And of course, this is when the real discomfort begins. You're in bed, but you can't move much. The layers are heavy, the air thick, and you're starting to realise. You might have overdressed. You shift slightly, just a little, to relieve the pressure on your hip, and immediately regret it. The weight of the blankets resettles like a reluctant avalanche, pinning you with flannel authority. There are at least 4 layers: the bottom sheet, the top sheet, a wool blanket, and a monstrous counterpane that feels like it was quilted with bricks. And somewhere inside all this, You're sweating. Victorian beds are not made for airflow. Between the thick curtains, the woolen socks, and the full-length nightdress buttoned to your throat, it's like sleeping inside a thermos. And yet, heaven forbid you sleep with your arms outside the covers. That's practically indecent. And worse, someone might think you're catching a chill. You can't help but glance at the embroidered pillow beside you. It's flatter than expected. Victorian pillows often are, and smells faintly of lavender sachets and starch. Some households stuff them with horsehair for firmness, though yours is mercifully made of down. Still, it's lumpy, like someone tried to smuggle a handful of marbles inside. You tug the covers under your chin and attempt to settle. The bed doesn't exactly invite rest. It's a fortress, a cocoon, a small plush prison. Victorians didn't see the bedroom as a sanctuary. It was a place of function, not comfort. You're here to sleep, not to unwind. And sleep must be earned, not indulged. This mindset explains a lot about your current predicament. You're technically in bed, but the process feels unfinished, like you missed a step or forgot a chore. You think about that one button left undone on your shift. Did anyone notice? Will your maid fix it in the morning, or will it be noted in some invisible column of judgment? It's no wonder so many Victorians lay awake, not with racing thoughts, but with the tightness of rules stitched into every corner of their lives, even their bed sheets. Still, you try to make yourself comfortable. You stretch one leg, only to bump into a surprisingly warm object at the foot of the bed. You freeze. But then you remember it's a bed brick, a small wrapped ceramic stone, heated earlier and tucked under the covers before you came upstairs. The heater's almost faded, but it's still warm enough to toast your toes. You nudge it back into place with appreciation, a small mercy. Some households use hot water bottles instead, made of metal or rubber. Others wrap a baked potato in a cloth, one you'll later eat the next morning with breakfast. There's even a rumour that some eccentric families warm a baked tile and sleep with it like a pet. Victorians were inventive, if not always practical. Your eyes trace the edge of the canopy. A tassel dangles above your head like a velvet pendulum. You exhale softly, and finally your limbs begin to loosen. The bed may be firm and the sheets unyielding, but for now, just now, you've settled into the stillness. Sleep doesn't come quickly, but in a world this rigid, just lying down properly is half the victory. The last glow of the oil lamp fades behind the curtain, and now you're fully immersed in the hush of a Victorian night. Except, of course, you're not quite alone. Because somewhere just outside your door, or perhaps behind it, a quiet presence hovers. Not a ghost, not a shadowy memory, but a servant. Specifically your maid, who sleeps curled up somewhere nearby, never far enough to fully rest, and never close enough to be seen unless summoned. She has her own nighttime choreography, far less ornate than yours, but equally rule-bound. Once she helped you out of your day clothes and into your night clothes, brushing your hair, handing you your brush, retrieving the bed warmer, she disappeared down the hall to her own corner of the house, or rather to the corner inside the house. Because Victorian servants don't have bedrooms in the way you think of them. If she's lucky, she has narrow attic space under the eaves, a cubby with a slanted ceiling and a threadbare curtain instead of a door. But more likely she's sleeping in a converted linen cupboard, a rolling cot shoved beside the scullery, or even on a mattress pulled out from under the stairs. Some houses even built bed-in-a-drawer units, actual sliding compartments beneath stair landings or between closets, where a servant could tuck herself away like a stored quilt, out of sight, always on hand. The architecture of the house reflects the values of the time, hierarchy made physical. Your bedroom is lofty, filled with furniture and air. Hers is practical, closeted, portable. If you ring the bell beside your bed, a pull wire connected to the servant's floor below will rattle, waking her with a clang no matter how deeply she sleeps. Not that she sleeps deeply, she's trained not to, because the night is not hers. Even now, as you settle under your counterpane, she's probably finishing her own ablutions, perhaps wiping her face with a rag dipped in reused bath water, or folding the last of your linens before placing her boots just so beneath her cot. The soundscape of the Victorian night is not silence, but soft movements from behind walls, a shifting floorboard, a cupboard opening, the gentle thud of someone kneeling to stoke a dying hearth or placing kindling in preparation for morning. You can feel it, even from your fortress of sheets. The line between public and private is blurred by routine. Your maid may be invisible most hours, but she is always near. She knows whether you favour your left or right side. She knows if your socks need darning. She sees the strand of hair left on your pillow, the page folded in your diary, the wrinkle in your hem you missed, and in a way this closeness is mutual. You've seen her yawn in the early hours, rub her wrist after pulling water, straighten her collar even when no one is watching. In this house, in this moment, you share a quiet proximity. Two people winding down in parallel, each tucked into separate corners of the same night. You lie there in the dark, half swaddled by your bedsheets, listening, just listening. There's something oddly comforting in knowing your maid is only a bell pull away. Not that you'd ring it. Not unless something truly important arose, like a missing shawl or a particularly persistent draft sneaking through the window frame. Still, just knowing she's there softens the edges of the silence. But beneath the comfort lies a quiet truth. Victorian nights are built on someone else's wakefulness. For you to be warm, someone had to light the fire earlier and monitor the coals. For your sponge bath to appear on cue, someone had to boil water, haul it up 2 flights, and not spill a drop on the stair runner. Even your pillow, with its awkward lump and faint scent of lavender, was fluffed and spritzed by hands more cracked than your own. And those same hands, now folded beneath a thin blanket somewhere behind the pantry door. Sometimes you wonder what she dreams about, if she has time to dream at all. She probably sleeps in the same underclothes she wore to scrub the stairs, wrapped in a shawl that smells faintly of wax polish and lye soap. There's no hairbrush with a silver handle, no embroidered slippers, just a hard mattress, an oil lamp stub, and maybe a biscuit pocketed from the scullery shelf. But she's not the only one. The house pulses with other quiet figures at this hour, a subterranean society of half-sleepers, each one linked to someone else's comfort. There's the butler who checks the locks, the footman who ensures the back gate is bolted, the cook's assistant who preps the oats for morning porridge. They move like ghosts through the corridors, but unlike ghosts, they carry buckets and wipe things down. Meanwhile, above them, you lie in a cocoon of expectation. To sleep peacefully, you're meant to pretend these lives don't exist after dark, that everything resets once the gaslights are turned down, that the house sleeps top to bottom. But of course, it doesn't. And perhaps that's why you still haven't fallen asleep. You sit up just slightly, peeking through a gap in the curtain. The hallway lamp has been dimmed to a dull glow, the kind that turns brass into shadow. You see no movement, but you can sense it, like the aftertaste of motion. It's a strange coexistence, this shared night. Intimacy without conversation, dependence without acknowledgement, and yet you know her footsteps. You recognise the sound of her breath when she quietly folds laundry at dawn. You see her, though rarely fully, in the small things. The way the edge of the rug is always straightened, or how your brush is placed exactly where your hand expects it. In some small way, this is her room too. Just as the house doesn't truly sleep, neither do its rituals. Your sleep is bookended by someone else's labour, and as you finally begin to drift, you're aware, perhaps more than ever, of the web of unseen gestures that made this quiet moment possible. You sigh, your cheek now warm against the pillow's edge. You won't ring the bell tonight, but knowing it's there feels a little like comfort, a little like company. Some beds welcome you. Victorian beds challenge you. You've been tucked in, washed down, layered up, and loosely swaddled like a respectable adult burrito. And now, as your eyes adjust to the folds of the canopy and your limbs settle into the mattress's dips and lumps, you're left with the last and strangest stage of bedtime, navigating the bed itself. It is not soft, it is not springy, it does not cradle or conform. Instead, it offers structure, character, a firmness that makes you reflect on your posture, your choices, and whether your shoulder blade is poking directly into a loose feather. Victorian beds are not all the same, but they share a few common quirks. For one, they're often shockingly high off the ground, a carryover from earlier centuries when elevation was thought to protect against drafts, rats, and the unspoken horrors that might creep along the floorboards at night. The result? You don't just climb into bed, you ascend into it, like royalty, or a particularly tired mountain goat. And once you're in, getting out again is a whole other matter. There's no rolling to the edge for a bathroom trip. That's what the chamber pot's for. Tucked discreetly under the bed, just inches from your very expensive lace-trimmed hem. But the bed's not done testing you. The bed curtains, drawn tightly around the frame, were never just decorative. They serve several purposes: trapping warmth, creating privacy in a shared room, and muffling the many sounds of a creaky wooden house. Still, once closed, the curtains transform your world. The air inside grows still and heavy. The scent of wool, lavender, and polished wood wraps around you like a second blanket. You can't see the moonlight. You can barely hear the world beyond the fabric. The mattress creaks gently with each breath, a reminder that this bed, like the rest of the house, is still very much alive. Some beds creak more than others. You've heard tales of beds that groan so loudly on windy nights they wake the entire floor. Others are nearly silent, so silent you become convinced you've slipped into another world entirely. You're not sure which is worse. And then there's the matter of what's actually inside the mattress. In your case, you're lucky. It's stuffed with feathers, though they've bunched and shifted over the years into strange little ridges and valleys. But other beds, even in respectable homes, are filled with less glamorous materials: horsehair, straw, coconut fibre, or in the countryside, dried bracken and hay. Some even mix in chopped rags to soften the feel. Every so often, you hear about someone discovering a long-lost comb, a broken locket, or a child's marble inside their mattress. Bedtime archaeology, Victorian edition. You shift again, trying to find a dip that cradles instead of prods. Your foot brushes the edge of the bed frame. Cold iron or carved wood, depending on the season. You pull it back quickly. The layers of sheets and blankets may trap your body heat, but they can't shield you from the odd chill that creeps in at the corners. And so you lie there, arms tucked in, collar buttoned, socks up, listening to the mattress, to the curtains, to the soft shuffle of the house continuing its own routine without you. Because even when you're in bed, in the Victorian era, you're never quite at rest. You adjust your pillow, flattening it with one hand while trying not to disturb the fragile stack of everything else pressing down on you. There's a specific art to managing the Victorian bed once you're in it. You can't toss or turn freely, not with the tightly tucked hospital corners or the stiff nightclothes cinching you like a gentle punishment. And if you do manage to shift your position, you'll likely just create a new wrinkle that will annoy you for the next hour. You try turning to your side, but the feather-stuffed mattress doesn't take kindly to motion. It shifts unevenly beneath your hip like a boat with one too many passengers on one side. The curtain beside your face stirs slightly, as your breath rebounds off the fabric. And just like that, you're keenly aware that you're boxed in, layered, swaddled, sealed. You could pull back the curtain, but that would let in the cold, and the night air has its own set of disapproving whispers. So you stay in your little fabric cave, adjusting in millimeters, not inches. You can't help but think of how strange the Victorian idea of comfort really is. Everything about this bed is a contradiction. It's tall and imposing, but fragile in the joints. It's soft in name, but stiff in feel. It's meant to protect you from the world, but somehow feels like it's judging you too. Still, there are perks, if you know where to look. That warming pan you set aside earlier has left a faint line of heat down by your ankles, and the counterpane, for all its unnecessary embroidery and lace fringe, holds warmth like a fortress wall. You reach down to check that the bed brick is still warm, just a faint heat left now, nestled in a sock to keep it from burning your feet. It's not fancy, but it's effective. Some families even sleep with heated stones wrapped in newspaper or flannel, passed down through the years like heirlooms. You heard once that someone tucked a hot potato into their foot wraps at night, only to fry it for breakfast the next day. Efficient, if slightly unappetizing. You wonder if the pillow will ever stop smelling like starch and lavender sachet. You wonder if you'll ever stop noticing how tightly the bed curtains wrap around the corners of the mattress, forming what feels like a velvet-lined box. You wonder what time it is, and whether that distant creak from the hallway means someone else is still awake, wrestling with their own fortress of bedding. Victorian beds, you realise, aren't just places to sleep. They're statements. They say something about your class, your household's discipline, your understanding of the proper way to prepare for rest. They're meant to impress visiting aunts, to reassure your in-laws that you were raised properly, to keep dust off your face and virtue in your collarbone. You finally settle, hands folded, eyes closed, feet pointed forward and slightly separated, as though even in sleep posture matters. And just before sleep flirts with the edge of your consciousness, you remember you forgot to air out the bedclothes this morning, and someone probably noticed. You sigh, not with defeat, but with the resigned grace of someone who knows that even at rest, the performance continues. You're almost drifting, half asleep in your fortress of flannel and feathers, when the faintest click stirs you back. Not loud, not alarming, just the barely there sound of metal shifting in its slot. That's the latch on the narrow stairwell just beyond your door. You know it because you've heard it before. It's the route the maid takes on her final pass through the upper rooms. She's not here for conversation, or even to check on you, just to collect what needs collecting. Maybe she'll gather the damp towels from your washstand, or take note of which rooms will need fires relit in the morning. Sometimes she just stops to listen, briefly, to confirm all is well. You pretend to sleep. Not because you must, but because you're expected to. In a Victorian household, the hours after bedtime are not truly yours. They belong to the house, and the house is never fully still. Your thoughts drift to the narrow spaces carved just for the staff. The servant stairs, steep and utilitarian, tucked behind panelling or concealed behind doors that always squeak just a little too loudly. Unlike the grand staircase with its polished banister and portrait of Great-Uncle Horace, these back staircases are bare wood, worn smooth by hurried footsteps. No carpet, no polish, just the invisible bloodstream of the house. You imagine your maid descending now, the faint glow of her candle held low to avoid waking anyone. She's probably carrying the day's laundry bundle under one arm, her other hand brushing the wall to stay upright. By now, she's already spent 14 hours moving, folding, dusting, lifting, pouring, fetching, and her night is not done. You think again of where she'll sleep, perhaps in the sliver of attic above the scullery, under a blanket thin enough to be folded into a napkin, or in a converted cupboard, like the one you saw once during a summer visit to your aunt's. just wide enough for a cot and a trunk with a dangling string to signal a bell pull. She might even sleep in the bed recess built into the wall of the laundry room, behind a thin curtain that barely keeps the draft out. These were common in Victorian homes, especially for housemaids expected to wake before the family. They're designed for access, not comfort. You recall once in winter seeing frost on the inside of the pantry window. It had crept in overnight, etching delicate spirals across the glass. You had stood there mesmerised. Your maid, standing just behind you, had said nothing, but you realised later that she had likely spent the night sleeping just beneath that very window, and still she'd been up before dawn, lighting the range. The Victorian house at night is more than furniture and etiquette. It's a shifting ecosystem, built on the movement of invisible hands. The beds are warm because someone rose early. The wash basin is full because someone carried the weight. Even your hairbrush, perfectly placed, is the result of habits you never see, the quiet discipline of those who live between the bells. You roll slightly onto your side, one arm slipping free of the counterpane. The room is still but not silent. A faint scuff, the creak of a distant board. Somewhere a drawer opens and closes. The night continues its quiet choreography. You're still half listening to the house move without you, those subtle shifts behind the walls, beneath the stairs, when you remember something strange. Once, during a stay in your cousin's townhouse, you woke up to find the fire already lit, the curtains already drawn, and a warm cloth folded beside your pillow, all without ever seeing anyone enter. It's the peculiar magic of a Victorian household. Invisible labour timed to perfection. It's also the reason why so many servants sleep near their masters, sometimes even inside the bedroom itself. You've heard of households where a junior maid sleeps on a small cot at the foot of the bed. Others slide narrow truckle beds, thin wooden frames on casters, out from beneath the master's bed frame at night, then tuck them back under before sunrise. Some rooms even have built-in servant alcoves, tiny half rooms partitioned off behind a curtain, no wider than a wardrobe. The goal is proximity, efficiency, the quiet promise that someone is always near, just not so near as to be seen. In grander homes, the valet or lady's maid might retire to a dedicated servant's bedroom nearby. But even then, the door is always left slightly ajar, or the bell-pull string coiled neatly at the bedside. Sleep is conditional, light, easily broken by duty. Your own maid sleeps just across the hall, you think, or perhaps in the cupboard behind the linen press. You're not quite sure. You've never asked. It would be odd to ask. Not rude, exactly, but improper, as if noticing her rest somehow implies she shouldn't have it. And yet, you're hyper-aware of her schedule. You know she rises before the sky turns blue, that she moves without shoes so the hallway won't echo, that she warms her hands over the kettle before lacing your corset. These are the facts you learn not through conversation, but through pattern, presence, silence. There's a particular stillness in this kind of shared night. A pause where two lives briefly exist in parallel, just a wall apart with wildly different rhythms. You're tucked into pressed linens, sinking into a mattress built for display. She's curled around her knees beneath a scratchy wool blanket, listening for footsteps overhead. You're both breathing the same cold air. You wonder, not for the first time, how often she lies awake thinking of you. Not you as a person, but you as a set of tasks. A hair to brush, a gown to starch, a bell to answer. You realise uncomfortably that in her dreams you probably appear only in verbs. You shift in bed again, more carefully this time, not to settle your own comfort, but as if not to disturb someone through the floor. It's a strange empathy, this bedtime awareness, the quiet guilt of being restful only because someone else can't be. Eventually your thoughts drift back to your own world, your own anxieties, The letter you forgot to answer, the new gloves that pinch, the side table drawer that's begun to stick. Small things, manageable. But even now, as your limbs begin to soften, you hear one last distant sound, a faint clink of metal. Maybe a kettle lid, maybe the warming pan being emptied. Then silence. And that's when you know the house is finally still. You think you're done for the night. You've washed, changed, climbed, adjusted, listened, and at last you've begun to settle into the rigid embrace of your Victorian mattress. But just as your breath starts to slow and your limbs grow heavier beneath the counterpane, you remember you forgot your nightcap. And no, not the tasselled cotton hat hanging uselessly on the bedpost. You're not that old-fashioned, not yet. What you forgot is the drink, because in a Victorian household, bedtime is rarely dry. You fumble gently for the tray on your bedside table. It's there, just where your maid placed it. A small ceramic jug, a narrow glass, and beside them, a faint whiff of something. Pungent, herbal, slightly acidic. Tonight's drink is a vinegar cordial with cloves. You grimace before you even lift the lid. Victorian nightcaps are not the cosy mugs of hot cocoa modern minds imagine. They range from the merely odd to the borderline alarming. Some families swear by warm milk with nutmeg. Others prefer bitter tinctures made from gentian root or rhubarb, allegedly to settle the humours. There's even a popular tonic made of lemon juice, molasses and cayenne pepper, meant to clear the lungs, stimulate digestion, and possibly strip wallpaper. And then, of course, there's sherry. A safe choice, if slightly frowned upon for the unmarried or under 30. Still, a thimbleful of sweetened wine before bed is hardly scandalous, and most households indulge quietly. You once stayed at a cousin's where everyone received a dram of port in matching etched glasses each night, delivered on a silver tray by a footman who knocked once and never made eye contact. You remember thinking it was oddly elegant, and also oddly clinical. Tonight's vinegar concoction, however, is less elegant and more aggressive. You take a small sip. It tastes like pickled fire. Your eyes water. But apparently it helps prevent night vapours, whatever those are. A magazine clipping tucked into your diary once promised that such tonics fortify the nerves and keep melancholy from the bedchamber. You're not sure about your nerves, but the sheer strength of the flavour has certainly startled you into full awareness again. Some people swear by spoonfuls of treacle. Others take drops of tincture of valerian or even raw garlic syrup. There's a rumour in town that the ironmonger's wife drinks onion water before bed and hasn't caught a head cold in 12 years. You'd rather risk the cold. Still, you can't help but appreciate the ritual of it all. There's something grounding in the predictability of the tray, the glass, the peculiar taste. It marks a boundary. Day becomes night. Action becomes stillness. It's less about pleasure and more about punctuation. You place the empty glass back on the tray, careful not to clink. The flavour lingers on your tongue like an unresolved question. You settle back against your pillow, warmth spreading down your chest in a slow, stubborn bloom. And now, perhaps you're ready to sleep. But even as your body begins to yield, your mind starts to drift toward the other kind of nightcap, the one you didn't drink. The one your cousin mentioned once in a whispered confession during a summer stay. The bottle kept in a locked drawer. The one she called the sleep syrup. You never asked what was in it. You lean deeper into the pillow, the taste of that clove vinegar nightcap still tingling unpleasantly at the back of your throat. It's not pleasant, but it's familiar. And in a Victorian bedroom, familiarity holds more value than flavour. You stare up at the canopy above. The fringe sways ever so slightly with your breath, and for a long moment that awful little sip starts to work. Your limbs feel less like tension wires. Your jaw unclenches, your toes stop curling in protest at the cold. Still, not everyone in your circle is as committed to vinegar and milk. Some, quietly, carefully, prefer something stronger. You think again of your cousin's whispered sleep syrup, the bottle she kept wrapped in an old stocking hidden inside her embroidery drawer. It wasn't wine or cordial, but some odd concoction she bought from a travelling apothecary. Brown glass, no label, just to smell like overripe roses and anise. She only took it when the days were particularly bad, she said, or when the house was especially loud, or quiet. You remember her face the morning after, still flat, a little too pale, not unhappy, just distant. Of course, you'd never touch anything like that. Your house is respectable. You drink your vinegar, you wrap your feet, and you fall asleep the traditional way. Slowly, deliberately, one rule at a time. Still, as your fingers find the edge of the counterpane and fold it more neatly beneath your arm, you know that Victorian bedtime drinks come in many forms. Your neighbour, the sharp old widow with the creaking knees, swears by a heated mug of beef tea. Salty, rich, more broth than beverage. The doctor who visits your father keeps a flask of what he calls restorative tonic that smells suspiciously like gin and cough syrup. Even your governess once confessed to sneaking a splash of bitters into her tea before bed. She claimed it was good for digestion, but the way she said it made you wonder what else she was trying to swallow down. Some drinks are tradition, others are escape. You shift your weight and glance toward the bedside table. The tray sits quietly, its contents already settling into their overnight positions. The glass is rinsed, the jug capped, the cloth napkin folded with a precision only someone in stiff sleeves would bother with. All around you, the room breathes in its silent routine. The walls do not creak, the curtains do not flutter. The house has finally settled into its deeper rhythm, and now so do you. Your stomach feels just a bit warm, not from pleasure, not from indulgence, but from completion. The drink wasn't delicious, it wasn't even comforting, but it was expected, and in this world that's often enough. As your eyes begin to close, you think, briefly, of what drinks will await you tomorrow. Perhaps something milder, perhaps something sweet, but most likely, the same as always, vinegar, cloves, and a steadying hand at the tray. Because Victorian rest doesn't come from stillness, it comes from repetition. You would think the lights simply go out and that's the end of it. But in a Victorian home, turning off the lights is a whole production, especially when those lights involve open flames and complicated levers. Your lamp burns low on the nightstand, its flame shrinking with the last of the oil. It's tempting to blow it out like a birthday candle, but that would be terribly improper. You reach for the brass snuffer, shaped like a tiny bell on a hinged stick. Every house has one. Some are ornate with engraved handles and little clawed feet. Yours is plainer, but still dignified. You lower the cone over the flame slowly, listening for that little sigh, the soft thump of the lamp giving into darkness. That moment, oddly tender, always feels ceremonial. And just like that, your room is wrapped in shadow, with only the glow of the hallway gaslight seeping through the thin gap under the door. But the real trick isn't extinguishing the flame, it's making sure nothing accidentally relights itself in the middle of the night. Fire in Victorian times is both friend and very real foe. It warms the parlour, it boils your tea, it lights your reading corner, but it also hides in chimney flues, lives behind coal grates, and dances far too easily across muslin curtains. You rise reluctantly from your bed, socks scuffing on the cold floorboards, and make your final safety check. The coals in the bedroom grate have already gone dull, their edges glowing like distant embers. You poke them once with the iron tongs for good measure, just to be sure no rogue spark is planning mischief. Some households cover their grates with damp cloths or metal hoods before bed, a precaution learned from someone else's cautionary tale. Then you check the window latch. Is it fully closed? Not because you're afraid of intruders, but because a night breeze might stir the drapes too close to a candle, or worse, invite a puff of air into the chimney and send ashes fluttering like fireflies. Your eyes sweep the floor. Nothing flammable near the hearth. The bed curtains are tied back far enough. The warming pan is cool to the touch, resting on the slate tile. You even feel the top of the oil lamp making sure it's no longer hot. It's a delicate dance between comfort and caution. You're not paranoid. You're just trained. Every Londoner has heard the stories. Row houses reduced to cinders, an entire block smothered in smoke because someone fell asleep with the grate open. Besides, your dressing gown is made of brushed cotton, and your bed canopy is velvet. You've seen how quickly both can catch fire during a hearth cleaning. You climb back into bed, body quickly reminded of its former warmth. But now your eyes are wide open again, alert from the circuit you've just completed. You pull the covers tight and take one last look at the faint light flickering under the door. The house seems quiet, compliant, but you know better. In a Victorian night the fire may sleep, but it always sleeps lightly. You settle back under the covers, but your mind hasn't quite followed. There's a hum in your chest, a residue of all that checking and double-checking. A Victorian bedtime doesn't leave much room for spontaneity, and even sleep itself must be earned through ritualized vigilance. You shift onto your side. The pillow is still cool where you haven't touched it, and the faint scent of scorched coal lingers near the curtain seams. Somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard sighs. You tell yourself it's just the timber adjusting to the chill. Still, part of your attention remains fixed on the emberless hearth across the room. The grate is black now, barely visible in the low light, but your ears are tuned for that tiny tick or pop, the warning sound that something somewhere still smoulders. Some families sleep with a bucket of sand or water nearby just in case. Others place a cast-iron fender in front of the grate, not for decoration, but as a barrier. You once heard of a household that left a pot of flour on the mantel, convinced it would somehow smother a flame faster than anyone could react. Flour, as if fire plays by baking rules. You try to laugh quietly to yourself, but your throat's dry. You reach again for the jug on your side table, careful not to knock anything over. The water is tepid now, and the ceramic cup is chipped at the rim, but you drink anyway. Even that small action feels like it must be done neatly, correctly, without a splash. No one's watching, but you've lived with these rules long enough that they've become internalized spectators. You set the cup down and stare up at the ceiling. In some homes, people sleep with a handbell beside the bed, not just for summoning the maid, but for raising an alarm. Fires travel fast in connected homes. A fallen candle in one room can become a neighbourhood tragedy by dawn. And yet, for all this caution, the house feels safe now. Not because it is. Houses of this era are made of dry wood, woven cloth and open flames. But because you've done what you're supposed to do. You've followed the protocol, you've performed the evening dance, and in the Victorian world, performance is protection. The curtains are drawn. The gas is off, the warming pan has cooled, the bell pull cord lies still at your bedside, and the house, finally, goes quiet. You sink back into your pillow, a little less rigid this time. Your eyes flutter, your breathing steadies. And as your thoughts begin to blur into the edge of sleep, one last idea drifts lazily across your mind. Tomorrow night, you'll do it all again. The sponge bath, the vinegar cordial, the hairbrushing, the checking of coals. Not because it's relaxing, but because it's expected. And in a world this particular, even sleep must be earned in layers. The room is still. The coals are quiet. The nightcap is long finished, and just as you finally begin to slip towards sleep, truly slip, you remember something. You forgot to write in your diary. You sigh, barely audible even to yourself, and fumble for the slim notebook tucked inside the drawer of your nightstand. It's not large, just a palm-sized volume wrapped in worn leather with a brass clasp that clicks softly as it opens. The pen is already there, its nib wrapped in blotting paper. It's all part of the routine. Because in the Victorian world, going to bed without recording the day feels incomplete, like leaving a room without closing the door. You shift up onto your elbows and tilt the book to catch the last ambient glow from the hallway lamp. The pages are cream-coloured and faintly lined, your handwriting so tight and looping that even you have trouble reading it back. Copperplate is elegant, yes, but it's also a bit of a nightmare when you're half asleep. Still, you write. Not everything, of course. You've learned how to write around certain truths. Today's entry might mention that the parlour game was spirited, but not that Mr. Wexley sat far too close on the ottoman. It will note that the vinegar cordial was invigorating, not that it nearly made you gag. It may even mention the bed warmer without confessing the scorch mark it left near your ankle, because diaries are not just private. They are, in some odd way, performative. They are the final audience, the ritual bow after the curtain drops. You write in third person sometimes, or in half code. A certain phrase might stand for disappointment. A sequence of initials might hint at an argument. One dot in the corner of the page means the maid left your hairbrush out of place. 2 dots means you noticed and said nothing. You once saw your aunt's diary. She colour-coded hers with ink powders, sepia for annoyance, violet for surprise, crimson for admiration. She called it mood mapping. You call it a lot of work. Still, there's something soothing about the motion of the pen across paper, the scratch of the nib, the way a sentence curves and settles. It's quieter than talking, and somehow more honest. You pause to think, nib resting lightly above the page. What will tomorrow bring? Laundry, perhaps? A visit from your cousin? A letter to answer? You jot down a reminder in the margin. Check glove drawer. Left thumbhole thin. Then you close the book. The clasp clicks softly. The day is now recorded, however obliquely, and with that the last chore is done. You return the diary to its drawer, not under the handkerchief stack where it might tempt the maid's curiosity, but just beneath your bedtime novel. Easy to find, easy to hide. You settle back again. Eyes heavier now. The bed, though rigid, no longer feels unwelcoming. It has accepted you, in the way Victorian things do. Not warmly, but obediently. You lie back, satisfied, the faint scent of ink still clinging to your fingers. There's a small blot of blue on your thumbnail just under the edge, proof of completion, proof that the day has, in the most Victorian sense possible, been properly closed. Not with emotion, not with rebellion, but with tidy lines and deliberate penmanship. Outside your bed curtains, the house has gone entirely still. The fire is out, the lamps are dark, and the servants' corridor has gone quiet. But even in this hush, you can't help thinking, how many others are writing right now too? Because journaling isn't just something you do. It's what everyone around you does, in one form or another. Your older brother records his diet and his temperature every single day, convinced it will reveal something medically significant. Your neighbour writes down how many times her dog sneezed. The family down the road keeps a log of how many guests smiled during dinner, graded silently and tallied afterward. There is, you suspect, a compulsive urge among Victorians to quantify life, to trap it in ink before it slips away, not because they fear forgetting, but because they fear living improperly. A diary isn't just a record, it's a ledger, and you're both the accountant and the product. You once read an article advising young women to record their evening state, a daily summary of the condition of one's soul, wardrobe, and digestion. You're not sure which of those mattered more. For now, you've captured only fragments. The feeling of your fingers slipping on the vinegar bottle. The way the bed curtains held your breath like a second set of lungs. The way Mr. Wexley's glance lingered half a second longer than was decent. Nothing scandalous, nothing untrue, just enough. Always just enough. You shift gently, nudging the diary drawer closed with the heel of your hand. It thuds with a soft finality. The room welcomes the quiet again. You know the maid will find your blotting paper in the morning and replace it without a word. The pen will be wiped, the diary untouched, and yet she will know, without ever reading a word, what kind of night you had. Because Victorian houses are built on signs, clues, traces, and the people within them become masters at interpreting the unspoken. Your pillow feels warmer now. The bed has stopped resisting your shape. You can feel the linen smoothing into your outline, the mattress embracing your weight with faint creaks of acceptance. Outside, the wind shifts. A shutter stirs, but you're part of the night. The writing, the review, the reckoning is done. And with that, the only task left is the most difficult one of all. Letting go of the day. The diary is tucked away. The lamp is cold, and the house has fallen into a disciplined kind of silence. The kind that wraps around you like wool. Thick, comforting, but hard to breathe through. You lie still. But stillness, in a Victorian bed, is never quite synonymous with comfort. Part of the discomfort stems from what you're wearing. The nightgown, for starters, is not the soft cotton confection modern daydreamers imagine. It's stiff with starch, buttoned high at the throat, and heavy enough to double as a curtain. Your sleeves are gathered at the wrists with tiny pearl buttons, adorable in daylight, impossible to undo without help. You tried once to sleep with them unfastened, but the cuffs flapped about all night like moth wings. Never again. And then there are the bed socks, thick wool, hand-knitted, scratchy in that special way that makes your ankles itch just thinking about them. But you wouldn't dare remove them. Not only because the floor is cold, but because sleeping barefoot feels vaguely rebellious. If you're particularly proper, or someone else is in the house, you might also wear a night wrapper, a sort of padded dressing gown worn over your nightgown. Quilted, ribbon-tied, and slightly ridiculous. It's not for sleeping, but for being seen just before bed. You once wore yours to answer a knock at the door, and spent the next week fending off compliments that were somehow insults in disguise. So modest, they said, with smiles too polite. The final touch? A hairnet or sleep cap, not for warmth, but to prevent your carefully brushed and oiled hair from tangling against the linen pillow. This cap never fits properly. It slips backward by morning, but without it, your morning routine will double in length and effort. So you lie there, capped, socked, collared, and cocooned. You're not in pyjamas, you're in defensive sleepwear, designed to preserve your dignity, your health, and your hairstyle. You wiggle one toe and feel the wool rub against your foot. Your arms rest stiffly against your sides, sleeves whispering with each tiny shift. There's a kind of restraint that settles over you, not just physical, but emotional. In the Victorian mind, sleep was not supposed to be indulgent. It was practical. It was regenerative. It was earned through cleanliness, order, and self-control. A person who slept well was a person of good conscience and strong character. A person who tossed and turned too much, well, that suggested unrest, a weak will, possibly even a digestive imbalance. So you don't toss, you don't sigh, you don't kick the counterpane aside and announce your misery. You lie still, because that is what sleep looks like, even if your shoulder aches. Even if your ribs feel pinched from the corset you only partly loosened, even if your feet are overheating in their woolen tombs, Stillness is part of the costume, and tonight you are fully dressed for the role. Your body obeys the stillness, but your mind, not so much. It wanders now, not in dreams but in fragments, half-thoughts caught between corset seams and collar buttons. And every time you try to drift off, you're reminded, somewhere, somehow, of one more thing you forgot. Was it the window latch? Did you turn your stockings inside out before placing them in the laundry pile? Did you leave your gloves too close to the grate? Sleep comes slowly when you're dressed for modesty and thinking in checklists. Your collar is a little too high. Your elbows pinched by the nightgown seam. And while you long to push the counterpane back, you know doing so would break the unspoken code. Endure quietly. Victorian sleep is not supposed to be about indulgence or pleasure. It's about form and function. Like everything else, even the furniture agrees. Your bed, though grand, is not made for flopping into. It's for entering correctly, sitting, turning, lying, folding hands. The entire process resembles a ritual more than a retreat. And the idea of a casual sprawl? Unthinkable. No one lies diagonally. No one kicks off the sheets. You once heard a story of a girl who twisted her quilt in the night and was later sent to a corrective sleep therapist. Or maybe it was just a very strict aunt. You shift minutely. The cap slips forward on your forehead. You reach one hand up, brush it back, and instantly regret moving. Now the sheets have wrinkled. You feel them creasing under your hip like a reprimand. Some people claim that Victorian nightclothes improve posture during sleep. The high collars supposedly train the neck to remain straight, the long sleeves keep arms close to the torso, and the buttoned cuffs prevent overextension. You can't say whether that's true, but your back certainly feels aligned, painfully so. Then there's the warmth. The socks have become foot-sized ovens. Your shift clings with a heat that's more oppressive than comforting. But you don't remove them, because that's not what's done. You close your eyes again. Think of the morning routine, the cold floor, the ewer of chilled water, the corset to be laced, the hair to be unwrapped and brushed again. Sleep is meant to bridge you to those things, to prepare you, not free you. Rest is a tool, not a reward. You can't help but marvel at how much effort has gone into simply being horizontal, how a bed, meant to soften, instead defines, how a nightgown, meant to comfort, instead disciplines. And yet, here you are, wrapped, warmed, watched by no one, and yet following every rule. Stillness again, one breath, then another. Eventually your limbs begin to forgive you. The collar stops itching. The socks become background noise. The creases smooth themselves. Sleep arrives not with fanfare, but with acceptance. Not of comfort, but of custom. You don't sleep despite the clothing. You sleep because of it. Because every button, every seam, every quiet discomfort reminds you that you're doing things properly. And in the Victorian world, sometimes that's all the permission you need to rest. The house is utterly silent now. No shifting floorboards, no kettle lids clinking in the scullery, no creak from the servant stair. Even the wind has stopped testing the window latch. You might think this is finally your cue to sink into sleep, but in a Victorian home, silence isn't just expected, it's enforced. It starts at 10 o'clock sharp. Earlier in stricter homes, it's the unspoken curfew of sound. From that moment on, voices must lower to murmurs. Piano lids are shut. Boots are removed at the door. Even coughing is best done discreetly, perhaps into a handkerchief in the hallway. Noise, after all, isn't just inconvenient. It's morally suspect. The Victorians believed that restfulness reflected inner order. A noisy household was considered a disorderly one, and disorder suggested weakness, or worse, poor upbringing. So families trained themselves to walk in soft-soled shoes, to to close drawers without slamming, to hold their breath when climbing stairs late at night. You once visited a friend's house where even the dog war felt on its paws. Inside your own room, you feel this expectation seep into the walls. The thick bed curtains help muffle the rustle of your sheets. Even your breathing feels like it should be tidied up, kept even, polite, untroubled. You once sneezed in the middle of the night and startled not just yourself but the maid sleeping 2 rooms over. She appeared with a shawl and a vial of camphor before you'd even finished apologising. And then there's the matter of the ticking clocks. Every room in the house has one. Mantel clocks, pocket watches, gilded timepieces nestled in glass domes. Each one ticks on its own schedule, some louder than others. At night those ticks seem to swell. You hear the one on your dresser, precise and slightly aggressive. From down the hall comes the more sluggish grandfather clock, its deep click like a pulse in the floorboards. Together they form a strange kind of music. Not a lullaby, more like a metronome of restraint. You are taught to fall asleep to this rhythm. Never to a lullaby or bedtime story. Those were for children. Adults learn to sleep to the sound of barely audible discipline. A neighbour once confessed she couldn't sleep without the hall clock ticking. It reassured her that time was moving forward, that everything was still in its place. When the clock stopped one night, just a wound-down spring, she stayed awake till dawn, convinced something had gone terribly wrong. You don't blame her. Because in the stillness of this hour, every sound, or its absence, means something. A creak is suspicion. A thud is failure. A whisper might be curiosity, or even impropriety. And silence? Silence is a statement. You lie there, matching your breathing to the clock on your dresser. Tick, inhale. Tick, exhale. You once read that factory girls did the same thing with loom noise during their 10-minute rest breaks. It trained the body to rest in rhythm with its environment. It's a strange, subconscious kind of obedience. But tonight, the rhythm works. The quiet isn't empty. It's structured. It's civilized. And in its grip, you find yourself slowly unravelling. Your eyes are closed now, but your ears remain open, trained by years of expectation to respond not to sudden sounds, but to their absence. There's a phrase you once overheard at a dinner party, spoken with amused pride by an older aunt. We train our girls to sleep quietly, so that if they ever make noise it must be for something serious. Everyone had laughed gently. You didn't. You'd understood too well. Victorian quietude isn't just a matter of politeness, it's a social signal. Those who sleep soundlessly are considered composed, trustworthy, reliable, the kind of person who could be entrusted with the silver keys or a cousin's secret. Those who mutter in their sleep, toss, sigh, or, heaven forbid, grind their teeth. They're marked, subtly, as people to be watched. You once shared a room with a distant relation for a summer. She kicked the covers off every night and mumbled into her pillow like a theatrical character mid-soliloquy. The housekeeper noted it once quietly while pouring tea. By the end of the week, your cousin had been reassigned to a room farther down the hall, closer to the laundry and farther from the drawing room. She never said anything. But she folded her napkin too tightly at breakfast for the rest of the season. That was when you first understood the Victorian principle. Noise has consequences. It's why everything in your room is designed to absorb sound. Heavy rugs, thick curtains, velvet upholstery. Even the wallpaper, once damp with paste, seems to absorb your breath like a sponge. Your door doesn't latch loudly. Your chamber pot lid fits snugly. The very walls seem to conspire in your silence. And yet, ironically, it's the tiniest noises that begin to comfort you now. A faint creak from the hallway, the familiar whir of the grandfather clock as it prepares to strike the hour. The distant swish of the maid's skirts as she extinguishes the final gas sconce in the back stairwell. You know these sounds. They are part of the score. They don't disturb you. They anchor you. Because in a Victorian night, true peace is not found in absolute stillness. It's found in the deliberate, purposeful quiet, where everything has a place, every step is muffled, every breath is measured. You exhale once, slowly. The kind of exhale that releases the last bit of resistance. Your fingers loosen their grip on the counterpane. Your legs stop bracing against the chill. And just as your mind begins to finally drift, the grandfather clock strikes 12. Not with a clang, not with drama, just a firm, measured bong. 1, 2, 3. Each chime like the punctuation at the end of a long, tightly written sentence. 12. Midnight. You lie still. Not out of stiffness now, but because stillness has finally become natural. The house does not congratulate you, it simply continues. And now, at last, you continue with it. Midnight has passed, but your body doesn't notice. It's too wrapped in wool, routine, and the soft rhythms of quiet. Still, something in the room feels different. Not colder, not louder, just altered. You glance toward the chair in the corner, where your dressing gown hangs neatly over the back. Something about the way the fabric folds reminds you. You were meant to change into the morning wrapper tonight. Not because of grief, not because anyone has passed, but because someone in the household is absent, travelling unexpectedly, gone to convalesce, or perhaps simply delayed by weather and trains. And in the Victorian world, absence carries weight. It leaves an imprint, and that imprint touches even the smallest things, like your nightwear. You forgot to change, and now, wrapped in your usual cotton gown, you feel strangely overdressed and under-observant at the same time. There's no rule book that demands this shift, but the household expectations are clear. When a member of the family is away, especially without a fixed return, those left behind are expected to carry a trace of that absence in their routine. Lighter conversation, subtler colours, even, when appropriate, the substitution of regular sleepwear for darker tones. Your morning nightdress is nothing grand, just a charcoal grey version of your usual shift, with a plainer neckline and black ribbon at the cuffs. The wrapper that goes over it is trimmed in black piping, the pockets lined with grey silk. These garments are not sad, they are symbolic. They say, someone is missing, and we notice. You sit up slightly in bed, unsure whether to rise and change. But the warmth is too strong, the weight of your blankets too convincing. You stay still, choosing instead to mark the moment inwardly. In some homes, families keep mourning slippers by the bedside, soft-soled black velvet, worn only during periods of absence or quiet reflection. Others light a lamp in the hallway and place a scarf over the shade, dimming its glow until the traveller returns. These acts aren't grand, but they are deeply noticed. You remember when your older brother first left for boarding school. Your mother changed into her grey dressing gown for 3 nights, even though no one mentioned it aloud. You remember the silence at supper, the way the housekeeper laid one less place at the table, but still smoothed the cloth where his plate would have sat. Even sleep adjusted. The clocks were wound more quietly. The footfalls on the stairs were softer. Conversations shifted away from cheer and toward neutral ground. Even the parlour games became subdued, as though laughter could disturb the balance. Now, as you lie in your regular bedclothes, you feel like you've broken something small. Not a rule, but a rhythm. Still, you whisper the person's name in your head. Just once. Just enough to acknowledge. And then you close your eyes. The house does not punish you, but you know it noticed. You lie still now, swaddled in the wrong nightdress, half wrapped in the right intention. The grey wrapper remains folded in the wardrobe. The black ribbon remains untouched. But even so, the gesture lingers, not in what you wore, but in what you remembered too late. That, perhaps, is the very heart of Victorian life. Not always doing the right thing, but being perpetually aware of what the right thing would have been. Mourning in the Victorian era isn't just for the dead. It seeps into the everyday, quietly colouring the hours when someone is simply not present. A missed dinner, a journey delayed, a letter left unanswered. These absences are not shrugged off. They are honoured in small, deliberate ways, through posture, through silence, through the softening of one's tone while brushing one's hair. Even dreams change during these times, or at least you're told they do. Some believe that when someone you care for is far from home, your sleep becomes more delicate, more prone to waking, more vivid in imagery, as if the mind itself is reaching across distance to say, I remember. I still shape my life around your outline, even while you're gone. You once heard of a woman who slept on only one side of her bed whenever her sister was travelling, not because she expected her to return that night, but because it felt disloyal to use the space fully without her. The maids noticed, of course. The bed was easier to make. You think now of the space beside you, unused, untouched, not because someone sleeps there when present, but because that half of the bed feels more like a margin, an empty space for someone not here, but not forgotten. The house senses these things. You're certain of it. The hallway sounds quieter, the servant's tread on the stairs softer. The ticking of the clock seems more thoughtful, less demanding. The hearth was left unlit tonight, not out of oversight, but out of awareness. Warmth can sometimes feel like too bold a statement. Victorian mourning isn't always draped in black veils or locked rooms. Sometimes it's a missed conversation, a quieter good night, a deliberate choice not to smile too widely in the mirror. You turn gently on your side, pulling the covers with you. Your legs shift inside their woolen socks. The sleeve of your nightgown tugs slightly at your shoulder. You wish, just briefly, that you'd had the presence of mind to put on the grey one. But perhaps remembering is enough. Your eyes begin to flutter closed again, not with guilt, but with recognition. This is part of the evening now. This soft, shadowed space between presence and absence. And in a few days, when the person returns, everything will resume. The lighter gown, the fuller dinner conversation, the usual firmness in your pillow. But tonight, the silence means something. And though you're not dressed in mourning, your sleep will wear it well. Sleep flirts with you now, close enough to touch, but just evasive enough to linger out of reach. And you suspect it has less to do with your nightdress, or the socks slowly roasting your feet, and more to do with something far stranger, the way you're lying. Because in Victorian bedrooms, even your sleep position comes with expectations. You shift slightly, flattening onto your back, then hesitate. Sleeping on your back is acceptable, regal even, but only if your hands are folded neatly over your stomach. Any looser, and you risk looking slovenly, or worse, unladylike. You try your side. That's often recommended in health manuals, especially the left side, supposedly better for digestion. But then again, the family physician once said sleeping on one's left could encourage bilious temperament, whatever that means. You tuck your knees in slightly, then remember reading somewhere that curled posture in adults suggests an undisciplined mind. Even in unconsciousness, your body's being observed, if not by others, then by rules etched deep into culture. Some women are taught to sleep flat with their chins lifted, so their jawlines remain elegant. Others use extra pillows to raise their heads, convinced it discourages wrinkles or improves the complexion. You once stayed with a cousin who tied a silk ribbon under her chin every night to refine her jaw in sleep. You're not sure it worked, But she married well, so perhaps that wasn't the point. And then there's the pillow itself, too high, and your neck cramps, too low, and your face presses into fabric soaked with pomade and starch. You fluff it just enough to balance your ears, but not so much that it creases your hairstyle. A small compromise, one of hundreds. You think just briefly about your maid. Does she go through this? Does she lie awake worrying about her wrist position, or how her hair might crease against her cheek? Or does she collapse onto her cot like a dropped coat, too tired to care? You envy that, in a quiet, traitorous way. You once dared to sleep on your stomach during an illness when you couldn't bear the pressure on your ribs. The next morning, your governess raised a disapproving eyebrow and said it was the posture of animals. You've never done it since. Even in the privacy of your own bed, posture is a performance. But performance is safety. In this world, you are what you appear to be, even asleep. So you settle, back onto your side, knees carefully spaced, arms crossed gently at the waist, like a portrait, like someone preparing to be remembered properly. You sigh, not from exhaustion, but from tension slowly releasing under the weight of familiarity. This is the way you've slept for years. Not the way your body wants to, perhaps, but the way it knows how. Outside the window, a breeze brushes against the pane. You don't open your eyes. You don't stir. The moment passes. And now, just maybe, sleep will finally take the shape it's supposed to. You lie there, arranged more than relaxed in the officially sanctioned Victorian sleep position, side-lying, modest, motionless. The bed doesn't soften with time, but your body finally stops resisting it. Sleep seems closer now, and yet, one last obstacle remains. Your dreams. Because even those in this strange and proper world are subject to expectation and superstition. Victorians didn't believe dreams were just passing whims. They were omens, warnings, echoes of one's moral state. You were raised on the idea that what visited you at night was shaped by how you behaved during the day, what you ate, what you said, whether you'd spoken too sharply or held in a sneeze too long. You glanced toward your pillow. Underneath it, just barely peeking out, is a small sachet of rosemary and dried mint, not placed there by accident. You tucked it in 2 nights ago after reading that rosemary prevents unseemly dreams and improves clarity of mind during repose. You aren't sure what that means exactly, but the scent is soothing, and it's become part of your nightly landscape. Your aunt swears by lavender for good dreams, and your sister once tried violets, though they gave her a rash. You even heard a rumour, passed around in whispers during sewing circle, that some girls sleep with iron keys under their pillow to prevent dreams altogether. Others tuck notes beneath the mattress to steer the mind, written hopes, warnings, or even the name of a person they hope to see in sleep. As a child, you once tried to dream about a boy in town by placing his name under your sheet. You dreamt of the postman instead. You never tried again. Now, you're more cautious. You think carefully before bed. What images might arise? Have you cleansed your mind properly? Avoided romantic novels in the evening? Maintained an orderly routine? Because dreams can be discussed at breakfast, and they are. Over toast and marmalade, someone will always say, "I had the most peculiar dream," and within moments it becomes a parlour analysis. "Fish mean change," says one. "No, fish mean illness," says another. "Did you see a ladder, a dog? Were you falling or climbing?" They treat it like mathematics, but more dangerous. A misinterpreted dream could haunt your reputation longer than a misstep at dinner. You've trained yourself to forget most of yours, or at least to recall them only in vague impressions. That way, when someone asks, you can say, "Nothing memorable," and mean it. Or at least sound like you do. Still, there's a flutter in your chest tonight, a hunch that your mind might have its own plans, rosemary sachet or not, your limbs finally loosen. The heat from the bed has built into a kind of weighted cocoon. The wool socks no longer itch. The collar of your nightgown stops tugging. The silence of the house becomes less noticeable, more natural. The clock ticks softer, and now, with all rituals complete, your eyes drift closed. If dreams come, let them be brief. Let them be simple. Let them pass like a fog across your pillow, leaving no trace. And if they don't come at all, perhaps that's safest. Your eyelids flutter with heaviness now. The bed, though rigid, no longer fights you. The mattress has become a firm suggestion rather than a stiff refusal. Your mind begins to float, but not fully drift, because you're not allowed to fall asleep just yet. Not until you've closed the book, not the diary. That's already tucked away. This is the acceptable bedtime novel, a volume selected with care, weighed for its moral tone, emotional temperature and social safety. It rests on your nightstand even now, its ribbon bookmark tucked neatly at chapter 8. You reach for it slowly, careful not to disturb the covers. The edge of the counterpane pulls slightly as you twist. There's no real comfort in this movement, but in the Victorian world, comfort is secondary to duty, even in leisure. Tonight's selection is The Minister's Daughters of Swansley Vale, a novel of modesty, sacrifice and quiet romantic disappointment. You've read it before, everyone has. It's the kind of book meant to be read in portions, a few pages at a time, so as not to overstimulate the emotions before sleep. Victorian bedtime reading is a narrow lane. Sentiment is allowed, but only when tempered with restraint. Humour is welcomed, but only if it's of the dry and instructive variety. Adventure, too stimulating. Horror, indecent. Poetry, acceptable, if sufficiently abstract. You once read a serialized novel in secret, a wildly implausible tale of pirates and a daring governess, and were so haunted by the excitement that you couldn't sleep for days. Your governess confiscated it and replaced it with sermons in verse. You open to the marked page and begin to read. The sentences are long, winding, heavy with commas. The heroine, Miss Clarabelle, is being forced to choose between duty and mild affection. Again. The prose folds over itself like lace trim, charming but entirely predictable. And that's exactly the point. This isn't reading for thrill or revelation, it's reading as ritual. Something to frame the edges of your day. A gentle glide out of wakefulness and into sanctioned imagination. You're not looking to be surprised. You're looking to be returned to your place in society, your place in the household, your place in bed. You read 2 pages, then 3. Your eyes begin to lose the thread, not because the story fails, but because it's doing its job. The rhythm of the words begins to mimic the rhythm of the house, proper, measured, slightly repetitive, safe. You let the book fall closed with a faint thup, not tossed, not dropped, just surrendered. And as you return it to the nightstand, ribbon restored, corners aligned, you feel, for the first time tonight, something close to readiness. The room is as it should be. The light is gone, the coals are cool, the bell pull cord is still, and now even your thoughts are dressed in proper lace. Sleep waits politely at the threshold. All it needs is your permission. The book rests. Beside you now, its spine straight and untroubled. You've read just enough to fulfill the ritual, not enough to stir the mind, not enough to leave an impression. Victorian reading before bed isn't about absorption, it's about alignment, about softening the day's sharp edges and guiding the brain toward approved thinking. If the characters are restrained, you will be too. If their thoughts are careful, yours will follow suit. You nestle deeper into the bedclothes, the printed words still flickering behind your eyelids like the afterimage of candlelight. Miss Clarabelle has once again refused an offer of marriage, Not out of dislike, but because she still isn't certain if she's too fond of sunsets. You'll read the next chapter tomorrow and find that almost nothing has changed, but that's the point. In a world this structured, change is best served in teaspoons. But not everyone sticks to the official reading list. You once caught your cousin reading a novel with no author's name, its cover wrapped in brown paper. She said it was just for fun, but she flushed deeply when she said it. When you later skimmed the book in secret, it was full of long stares, fainting spells, and characters who spoke in italics. You couldn't sleep for hours afterward, not from scandal, but from the overwhelming idea that people might think that way right before bed. Your governess had a rule: no fiction after 8. She said it heated the brain and muddled the dreams. She preferred domestic manuals and travelogues, both so dense with detail that the act of reading became indistinguishable from dozing, and yet, despite everything, you sometimes long for a different book. Something strange, something speculative, something with crumbling staircases and mysterious letters slipped under locked doors. You saw a copy of Frankenstein once in a window, but you walked past it quickly, hoping no one had noticed you looking. Still, you do dream. Not wildly, not in colour, but your imagination has its own secret attic, and sometimes, when the curtains are drawn and the coals have gone grey, it opens a small dusty door. Tonight, perhaps, it's already creaking open. Your thoughts drift. The familiar language of Miss Clarabelle dissolves into other voices, ones not printed, not sanctioned. You don't resist them. They don't stay long. Just a hint of story beneath the story. A dream on the fringe of another dream. The pillow beneath your head has warmed to your shape. The sheets no longer press. They float. And your mind, once tethered to rules and ribbons, begins to lift. Slowly, safely, within bounds. Because even if your bedtime reading never breaks the rules, your sleep might bend them just a little. The book is closed, the coals are cold, the house is stilled into its final hush, that rare and precious state where even the floorboards seem to rest. But you, despite the rosemary, the socks, the sanctioned storyline, are not quite asleep. Because there's always one last thing to do. Just before sleep, in that odd little pause when the mind is floating but not yet adrift, the Victorians often turned to last-minute tasks. Small, quiet, useful things, meant to make the next day run just a little smoother. They weren't burdens, they were bedtime companions. You reach toward the small sewing kit tucked in the drawer beneath your water jug. The light is gone, but your fingers know the shapes by memory. You pull out a needle already threaded with white cotton and find the loose hem at your sleeve cuff. Just 2 stitches, nothing more. Victorian households trained young women to be efficient even in rest. You were told many times that night is when cleverness hides, so you learned to keep a small stack of mending by your bedside, a pair of socks with worn heels, a collar needing reinforcement, a glove with a pinky seam escaping. Fixing them in the daytime would be wasteful. In the evening, they're gentle filler, the final threads before surrender. You sew slowly, carefully. 2 small stitches. You tie off the thread and bite the end like you were taught. It tastes faintly of soap. On the floor beside you sits your boot brush, just in case you remembered at the last minute that the edge of your heel was dirty. Next to it, a bit of beeswax for polishing the buttons on your waistcoat or the metal tips of your corset laces. Some women use this quiet time to trim their nails, others to retwist their hair braids so it dries with a neater curve. One cousin of yours famously rewound her day's receipts onto a spool each night, just to keep them in order for the next week's accounting. These moments aren't strictly necessary, but they feel necessary. Because in a Victorian household, usefulness is a kind of armour, something you wear even in bed. You once heard a lady's maid say, "Idle hands attract thoughts." She wasn't wrong. and so you keep them moving, just a little, just until your breath becomes slower and your limbs forget they're part of a schedule. You slip the sewing kit back into its drawer, but you don't lie down just yet. There's a crumpled handkerchief at the foot of the bed, left behind by accident. Possibly yours, possibly folded by the maid. Either way, it's wrinkled, and you know that if you don't smooth it now, it will be seen by someone in the morning. So you rise slightly, reach for it, and press it flat between your palms. Your fingers, at this point, are half asleep themselves. But the muscle memory remains. Smooth once, fold in half, fold again, tuck into the pocket on the chair back. Done. Now the bed calls again, and this time you have nothing left to do but answer. You sink back into bed, the hem stitched, the handkerchief folded, the drawer of mending supplies quietly shut. It's strange how such small things, barely worth a sentence in daylight, carry such weight here in the hush before sleep. But that's the Victorian way. Perfection in the margins. You settle once again under the covers, your fingers now resting quietly on the counterpane, still warm from the quiet choreography they've just performed. The air's cooled slightly in the room, enough to make the weight of the blankets feel earned. From somewhere beyond the walls comes the faintest sound of a bell being turned off for the night. A soft rattle of chain, then nothing. Everything is ready. And then you remember the stew. You don't know why. Perhaps it was the neatness of folding the handkerchief. Perhaps it's the lingering taste of clove from the nightcap. But your mind drifts back to the kitchen and to the pot of leftover stew sitting on the lower shelf of the scullery. You saw it at supper, ignored by nearly everyone. Carrots overcooked, gravy a bit too thin, and the turnips still firm in the middle. Yet tradition says it'll be served again tomorrow, reheated, perhaps with an extra spoon of barley to disguise the repetition. You wonder if anyone thought to cover it, or if, even now, the cook's assistant is padding barefoot into the pantry to wrap a cloth over the pot. If she forgets, the smell will seep through the house by morning, and someone, probably your aunt, will comment that the air feels heavy. It's odd, the things your brain collects before sleep, not the big moments, not the conversation about stockings at supper, or the glance you shared with the girl in the green shawl. No, just the stew. The quiet things that anchor a day to a body. You blink slowly, vision blurred by the heaviness of almost sleep. The embroidered edge of your pillow slips just slightly out of focus. Your mind wanders further now, brief flashes of boots drying by the fire, a misaligned spoon in the silver drawer, a bit of wax that never quite came off the dining table. It's these final, floating thoughts that accompany most Victorian nights. Not worries, not epiphanies, just soft observations like loose threads catching in the dark. You roll gently onto your side, no adjustment needed. The bed has finally given in to you or you to it. One hand remains above the blanket, palm upward, relaxed. You can feel the cool of the air there, just enough to mark the difference between skin and sheet. There are no more buttons to check, no more ribbons to tie, no more stockings to adjust. The mending is done. The reading is over. The bell pull cord hangs still. The house breathes softly. And now, at last, so do you. The room has fallen into a state beyond silence, a kind of suspended stillness, as though time itself has paused out of politeness. Even the ticking clock on your dresser seems to hesitate between each beat. Sleep is almost within reach. And yet, your eyes flick open. Because somewhere, tucked in the folds of your half-conscious mind, you remember one more thing you were supposed to do. Check the stew pot? No. The bell cord? Already done. Ah, yes, the hem of your best petticoat. You promised yourself you'd mend it tonight. You even placed it carefully on the chair, a quiet, folded reminder. But now, in the soft weight of bedtime, it feels miles away. You tell yourself it can wait, and it can. But the Victorian mind is not wired for letting things wait. You sit up, just slightly, and peer through the crack in your bed curtains toward the outline of the chair. There it is, white, crisp, creased from where you laid it down this afternoon. The hem is barely frayed, but you know it's frayed, and that means it will need to be fixed before your next proper engagement, which, if you're remembering correctly, is tea with a Mrs. Pembroke on Thursday. You settle back, tell yourself again, tomorrow, it will be there. But now your thoughts are teetering on the edge of that mental cliff. Once one small task appears in your head, the rest begin to line up. You still haven't repapered your drawer liners. You meant to replace the broken hairpin in your vanity tray. You never found the other glove from your walking pair, the one with the mother-of-pearl button that always sticks. Your mind drifts toward your boots. You're almost sure you didn't check them for scuffs. The sole of the left one has been catching lately. If it's not dealt with soon, someone will notice. Someone always notices. In most households, this is the true final hour, not for sleep, but for remembering. That strange, half-lit corner of the night where nothing can be done, and yet everything wants to be reviewed. You turn slightly in bed. The sheets, now warm, resist your motion with sleepy protest. You imagine the entire house doing the same, maids curled on folding cots, valets pressed against coarse blankets in back hallways, someone in the kitchen tossing under the weight of a to-do list only half finished. Even the silverware seems to be resting with one eye open. This is why so many people keep a pencil and scrap of paper by the bed, not for poetry or letters, but for lists. Practicality doesn't sleep, and the mind, trained as it is by habit, won't stop reporting in. You don't reach for a pencil. You simply whisper the list to yourself once, slowly, in order. Hem, glove, boots, drawers, pin. You repeat it under your breath, then let it dissolve into the folds of your pillow. It will either be remembered in the morning or returned tomorrow night. Either way, the house and everything you owe it will still be waiting. You breathe out, slowly, the kind of breath that doesn't come from exhaustion, but from release, from surrendering to the truth that not everything will be finished tonight. Not every glove will be located, not every petticoat hem will be stitched, and that's permitted. Not explicitly, of course. The Victorian household would never say such a thing. But somewhere between the ticking of the hallway clock and the soft give of the mattress beneath your back, you find the smallest sliver of forgiveness. You roll gently onto your back. Your legs rest straight now, no longer curled with purpose. One foot shifts under the counterpane, grazing the slowly cooling bed brick near the bottom. You feel a faint sting from the warmth. It's grounding, human. Even in all its strictness, the night does allow room for softness. You think of other people's unfinished chores scattered silently across the house. A scullery maid may have left a spoon unpolished. A valet may have forgotten to empty a coat pocket. A cook may have let the yeast rise too long. But the house still stands. The walls still hold. Perhaps that's the quiet mercy of the Victorian night. Perfection is the goal. But incompletion is the truth everyone secretly shares. And in that, there's comfort. You fold your hands gently over your chest, a posture so often practiced it no longer feels theatrical. The room is still dark, but not oppressive. The edges of the wardrobe blend into the wall. The lace trim on your pillow scratches faintly at your cheek, but it's a familiar scratch, like the rough bark of a tree you've leaned against many times. You imagine the hem of your petticoat still resting on the chair untouched, and instead of shame you feel almost tender toward it. It has waited for you once. It will wait again. A frayed edge does not unravel the entire dress. It simply waits its turn. Like everything else in this house, like you. You close your eyes now, for real this time. Not out of obedience, but because your body has finally reached the edge of what it's willing to control. The lists are quiet. The fabric has stopped scratching. The bed has absorbed your weight completely. From down the hallway, one final sound. A faint metallic click as the last latch is drawn. Perhaps the maid securing the back entrance. Perhaps the butler checking the safe. Or perhaps, just perhaps, the house itself letting out a breath. You smile. The to-do list will still be there in the morning. Along with the diary, the mismatched gloves, the sewing kit, and the mother-of-pearl button you'll eventually reattach. One thing at a time. For now, you've done enough. And in this quiet, careful world, enough is a kind of grace. You're somewhere between sleep and waking now, adrift in that dim, weightless space where thoughts have no sharp corners. But before you cross over entirely, something shifts again. Not in the room, not in your body, but in your memory. You remember the letters, not today's letters, the ones stacked neatly on the escritoire in the drawing room, awaiting stamps. These are older, folded with care, stored in a box beneath the bed, hidden between two linen nightgowns you no longer wear. You don't open them often, but you always think about them at night. They aren't scandalous. They aren't even particularly romantic. Just ordinary letters from people no longer nearby. Cousins who moved to other towns. Friends who married and became suddenly too formal. That girl who boarded the train to Manchester and never returned, save for 2 slightly smudged envelopes with looping blue ink and too many exclamation marks. You kept them. Not for the content, really. You've forgotten most of what they said. But the paper has a feel you can't replicate. The texture of a moment that was once important enough to write down. A weight heavier than the ink. Victorians were obsessive keepers of correspondence, not just for record keeping, but for rereading. Letters were meant to be revisited, like pressed flowers or ribboned hair. To read one again was not weakness. It was a kind of loyalty, a daily proof that one's feelings hadn't strayed. You remember the day you began hiding them, not out of shame, but out of necessity. You'd reread one too many times in the sitting room and felt the warm pressure of someone watching. After that, the box went under the bed. Now, as you lie here, still not asleep but no longer fully awake, you wonder if you should have pulled one out tonight. Just one. Not to read, but to hold. To remind yourself that there were once other evenings, other rooms, other conversations where someone chose words just for you. Some people tuck letters into the folds of their mattress. Others hide them in glove boxes or beneath drawer liners. You heard once of a woman who stitched hers into the lining of her dressing gown. When it wore thin, she said the whispers helped her sleep. Your letters don't whisper, but their presence is enough. You picture the box now, its rounded corners, the frayed ribbon keeping it shut. You can feel its weight, even without touching it. And suddenly, sleep feels less like a surrender and more like a conversation. Unfinished, perhaps, but still held together by folded pages and things not quite said aloud. You roll gently toward the edge of the bed, where the box lies hidden beneath you. You don't reach for it. You don't need to. You remember. And sometimes, in a house this quiet, remembering is the only sound that matters. You remain still, eyes closed now, but behind your eyelids the letters begin to unfold. Not physically, just in the mind. That pale blue stationery with the uneven edge, the signature in brown ink that smudged where someone pressed too hard. A pressed pansy still folded inside one of them, flat and dry as lace. You never answered that one. Not properly anyway. There had been no need. The letter hadn't asked for anything. It had simply described the way the clouds looked that morning, and how the postmistress had worn her bonnet crooked, and how the tea had gone bitter after being left too long. Just observations. A diary with a stamp. But it had ended with one line that still lingers. I wish I knew what your room looks like at night. And here you are, your room, at night. Not magical, not secretive, just heavy with linens and rules. Still, you imagine what it might look like from the outside. The edge of the counterpane rising softly with your breath. The dim outline of your elbow resting on the pillow. The little things that don't get captured in letters. The quiet things too small to be written. Some Victorians collect their letters like emotional ledgers, each entry a transaction, a marker of affection, of memory, of longing unspent. Yours are a little messier than that, not arranged by date or person, just stacked by feel. The heavier ones at the bottom, the ones with petals or ribbon tucked in the middle, the ones you reach for more than you admit. You never read more than one at a time. It feels like cheating somehow. You once read about a woman who had a secret drawer in her bed frame, an actual compartment carved into the wood beneath the mattress, just deep enough for a bundle of letters tied with blue string. When she passed, the maid found them. No one ever said what became of them. You wonder who would find yours, if they'd open them, if they'd know who the initials belonged to, if they'd read between the lines and see how lonely some of the most ordinary letters really were. You don't feel lonely now. You feel kept company by paper, by ink, by a dozen half-finished conversations that never needed endings. You shift slightly, imagining the box still beneath the bed, the corner of one letter just slightly bent. You think about reading it tomorrow, not the whole thing, just a line or two. You'll fold it closed again, maybe put a new ribbon around it, maybe not. Sleep finds you more gently this time, as if it too has paused to read a sentence, to trace a name, to remember. Because even in a world as orderly as this one, where sleep has a schedule and beds have rules, memory always finds its own way in. Sleep has nearly claimed you now, slow and syrupy, like honey running through the joints. But just as your body relaxes into the weight of the bed, one last sensation pulls you back. A chill. Not a draft exactly, but a cold awareness. A subtle shift in the air against your fingers, still resting lightly outside the counterpane. It reminds you of the wind slipping under a door, or the cool breath of linen not yet warmed by skin. Your eyes remain closed, but your mind is suddenly wide awake again. You reach without thinking, tugging the blanket higher, tucking your hand beneath it. The bed is warm beneath, but that thin edge where air meets cloth has whispered to your instincts. And in a Victorian home, a whisper of cold is never ignored. Because cold, as you were taught, is not just discomfort, it's a hazard. There are rules. Whole books written about proper insulation, the angle of curtain folds, the thickness of wool batting, whether bedposts should be padded. You know people who sleep with flannel tied around their knees or wrap their heads in woolen bands to prevent nighttime drafts from slipping into the ears and causing earaches. Or worse, a chill to the brain. Your great-aunt used to place rolled towels along the windowsills to block the wind, then tuck a heated brick beneath the mattress an hour before bed. She claimed it kept the bones from moaning. You thought it ridiculous as a child. Now, lying in a room where even still air can startle, you're beginning to understand. You shift again, more gently this time. The movement releases a slight gust from between the sheets, and you feel it dance across your collarbone. You pull the counterpane up again, this time to your chin. The wool scratches faintly at your neck. You don't care. Warmth is a luxury wrapped in discipline. In truth, most Victorian homes are not warm by default. Fires go out. Stones retain the chill of long winters. Water freezes in pitchers left too near the sill. You've woken before to frost traced across the inside of the window pane, delicate as lace but much less welcome. And so, people prepare. You once heard of a woman who lined her bed frame with rabbit fur, another who stuffed straw between her mattress and headboard. There are homes where copper wires are wrapped around bed legs to conduct earth warmth upward. Though no one can explain exactly how that works, it simply does. You recall a visiting gentleman once complaining that he could see his own breath indoors. The lady of the house replied, "Yes, but isn't it well contained?" You admired her composure, even as you secretly rubbed your hands together beneath the table. The truth is, Victorians don't expect comfort. They outwit discomfort, and so do you. You curl more tightly now, your knees drawn, your shoulders wrapped, the curve of your spine held close beneath the covers. The edge of the bed feels miles away. The chair, the wardrobe, the letters, even the stew, all have faded. You're alone with your breath, and the faint chill that reminded you once again that in this world even warmth must be earned. The cold lingers, not sharp anymore, just present, like a guest that hasn't spoken but refuses to leave. You shift again, softly now, as if your very movement might offend the air, and then your mind does what it always does at this hour. It wanders to remedies. You think of Mrs. Lawton from number 12, who swears by placing a pinch of ground mustard between two socks and warming it near the fire, not to eat of course, to sleep with, pressed to the soles of her feet. It brings the heat up from the earth, she says. You're not sure if that's science or poetry. Then there's the gentleman who invented the woolen muff for men, like a hand warmer but dignified. He claimed cold hands led to cold hearts, which led to marital distance, which led, eventually, to national decline. You're almost certain he was serious, and you recall the story of one woman who slept in a hollowed-out goose-feather nest, stitched from discarded pillows and old cloaks. She was never ill, they said, also never married. Perhaps the two facts are connected. You begin to smile, but it fades as you remember what your mother used to do. Before bed each night she would tuck the blanket beneath your chin, then place her hand gently on your forehead for a few seconds, not to check for fever, just to feel the temperature. The skin knows before the rest of you does, she'd say. You believed her. You still do. Because it's the smallest drafts that undo you. Not the howling wind, but the faint sliver of air slipping through a keyhole. That's how it begins. A stiff neck, a slow ache in the jaw, the kind of cold that doesn't make you shiver but makes you irritable, brittle, slow. That's why Victorians go to such extremes to trap heat. Flannel bed shirts, double curtains, bed rugs. Those curious padded tubes they call draft excluders, which look like sleepy snakes curled across thresholds. You think of yours now, lying across the base of the door, pressed snug against the floorboards. Just fabric and sawdust. Yet somehow it feels like the last line of defence against the night. You're warmer now. The wool at your throat has adjusted to your skin. The bed brick has cooled to body temperature. Even the pillow has grown soft at its centre. The cold is still out there, but it's not in here, and that's enough. You sigh. One of those long whole-body sighs that starts somewhere behind the ribs and finishes in the toes. Your fingers are finally still. Your breath has evened out. You can no longer hear the fire crackling in the parlour or the footsteps from upstairs. What remains is silence. A silence not empty, but wrapped in cloth and effort and habit. A silence that has been stitched and boiled and buttoned against. A silence that says, you have done what could be done. You are warm. You are safe. And that, in the Victorian night, is nothing short of a triumph. The silence is whole now, thick, not ominous, just total. You drift in it like a bar of soap in bathwater, weightless, unbothered. But in this padded hush, another feeling rises. Not discomfort, not fear, awareness. You become aware of your body again, not just the warm bits under the blanket, but the ones pressed against harder things. The shoulder that touches the mattress seam, the ankle resting over the bed brick, the very tip of your nose cold as porcelain, and you become aware of what you're wearing. Victorian nightwear is no simple matter. It is not soft fleece or slinky satin. It is structure, layer, purpose. Your nightdress, though called simple, is a knee-length cotton garment with embroidered cuffs, reinforced seams, and small shell buttons along the collar. Over it, a shawl, wool, not decorative. Underneath, perhaps a linen chemise if it's cold. Maybe even knitted stockings rolled halfway down the calves. You've known women who wear caps to bed, not glamorous ones, tight, lacy affairs that gather oil from the hair and shield the scalp from sudden drafts. Some claim they help with headaches. Others say they keep the brain from overcooling. That's the kind of logic Victorians use. Whether it's true matters less than whether it feels sensible. You think about how your nightclothes smell. Faint starch, a trace of lavender sachet tucked into the drawer, and always, always, a whisper of fireplace smoke. Not unpleasant, just honest. A scent that says, this person lived through the day. Your sleeves bunch slightly as you turn. They're cut wider than necessary, because you never know when your nightwear might double as sick room attire. You once spent a week in bed recovering from a stubborn winter rash, and by the end, the sleeves were more familiar than your own arms. Nightwear, for a Victorian, is not about sleep. It's about readiness. You might be called to the drawing room, summoned to a relative's bedside, pulled into a hallway dispute over candle shortages. Your garments must be dignified enough to greet company even from bed. There was once a woman in Kensington who kept a velvet ribbon near her pillow, so if ever roused, she could tie it round her collar before sitting upright. It gave the impression of preparation, she said. You admired her. You think of her now as you finger the edge of your sleeve. The seams are firm, the cuffs are loose. There's comfort in that. The room is colder than before, but your layers hold. The fire has long since dimmed, but your breath is steady, and as the weight of the day recedes, you begin to think not of what you're wearing, but of what it means to be clothed for sleep. Not naked, not defenceless, not informal, but shrouded in care, in protocol, in habit stitched into flannel and muslin. You're not just a person in a bed. You're a person still inside the rules, even here. You pull the shawl tighter around your shoulders, and something, small yet satisfying, settles into place. The edge of the fabric falls just right across your elbow. Your sleeve bunches slightly at the wrist, but not enough to fuss over. It's the kind of imperfection that feels human, that says this is lived-in comfort, not posed elegance. Victorian sleepwear, after all, isn't only for warmth. It's a symbol, one of the last before sleep steals away the day. A final, private uniform that no one sees but you still wear properly. Because how you sleep is, in many ways, how you exist when no one is looking. You think about the details that go unnoticed by others but matter to you. The satin edging on your shawl, worn thin from years of fingers tracing the same corner. The tiny monogram your aunt stitched into the hem of your nightdress, even though no one but you would ever see it. The fact that you never button the top button, not for laziness, but because it always felt too formal. Some Victorians take this bedtime attire so seriously that there are published manuals describing respectable nocturnal presentation. You once read a line that said, "To be improperly dressed for one's dreams is to invite disorder into the mind." At the time, you laughed. Now you aren't so sure. Because tonight, like so many others, You feel calmer after preparing for sleep than before. The act of dressing, of wrapping, of folding back the covers with care has done something to you. It's not just routine, it's ritual. And ritual, no matter how small, gives structure to the parts of life you can't control. You lie still, one foot angled gently against the bed warmer. You trace the outline of a cuff against your thigh. Somewhere far off, a clock chimes. Only once. You count the echo in your head, but don't mark the hour. It doesn't matter anymore. This is your hour now. Your body is layered and bound in softness. Your thoughts no longer clatter. Even your breath has taken on the rhythm of flannel, slow, warm, deliberate. And in this moment you remember a phrase your grandmother once used. Night clothes are for peace, day clothes are for armour. You didn't understand her then. You do now. Because everything about this, your garments, your shawl, your slow exhale into the folds of your sleeve, reminds you that you're no longer in battle with the world. You're no longer expected to speak, to work, to endure. Now you are allowed simply to be. As you turn slightly in bed, the nightdress rustles faintly. Not loud, not disruptive. Just enough to let you know it's still there, holding you. And in a world as structured and fussy as this one, sometimes the greatest comfort is knowing something still fits. The final moments before sleep are the quietest of all. Not because the house is hushed, though it has. Not because the bed is still, though it is. But because you have nothing left to adjust. Every corner of the blanket has been smoothed. Every garment rests just so. The shawl no longer slips. The fire has faded to its last whisper, and your mind, for once, has stopped reaching. This is the part of the Victorian night few people speak about. Not the bustle of undressing or the strangeness of bedtime rituals, but this, the stillness after all the rules have been obeyed. There's a feeling to it, like standing at the edge of something vast, but instead of fear, you feel readiness. You think of your bedroom not just as a place, but a companion. The wallpaper with its faded roses repeating endlessly into the shadows. The washstand still damp from your earlier sponge. The curtains drawn shut with a practiced hand, their fringe brushing the sill like a goodbye. Each thing in its place, each place tucked in. The Victorians are often accused of being overly obsessed with order, and perhaps they are. But lying here now, wrapped in warmth and silence, you begin to see the wisdom in it. Because order gives permission. Permission to rest. Permission to stop proving yourself. Permission to let the day go. The ticking of the clock becomes your companion now. No longer a reminder of things undone, but a gentle signal that time continues even when you don't. You don't need to be anywhere else. You don't need to say anything more. You don't even need to think. You remember something odd that your neighbour once shared. She claimed that the key to sleeping well was to imagine yourself as part of the furniture. A chair doesn't fret, she said. A table doesn't toss and turn. It sounded silly then, but you try it now. You let your limbs relax like carved wood. Let your head rest heavy on the pillow, like a teacup placed carefully after use. You even picture your body outlined like a silhouette in a fashion plate, drawn in soft pencil, labelled "at rest." There's comfort in that absurd little thought. Not because it's rational, but because it's gentle. And maybe gentleness is what the Victorians were really after all along. Not drama, not strictness for its own sake, but a sense of earned calm. A calm that only arrives after you've lit the fire, boiled the water, fluffed the pillows, chosen the right nightdress, tucked the letters, warmed the bricks, tightened the shawl, sniffed the lavender, checked for drafts, straightened the counterpane, and turned down the gaslight just low enough to trust the dark. And now, there is nothing left to do but sleep. The room has disappeared. Not literally, of course. Still here in all its dim, flickering familiarity. but your awareness of it has dissolved. You no longer track the outline of the dresser or the sigh of the curtains. Even the gentle thump of the hot water, bottle shifting at your feet, has faded into the background. What remains now is you, and something even quieter. Sleep isn't here yet, but it's circling. And in this final stretch, your thoughts grow small, simple. Not in content, but in weight. You're no longer rehearsing what you said earlier or what you forgot to do. Instead, your mind picks over smaller things. The feel of the linen seam against your shoulder, the way your breath hits the wool shawl, the faint scent of iron from the bed frame. These are the final guardians of consciousness, tiny sensations holding vigil until sleep arrives and relieves them. You remember someone once told you that Victorians believed dreams were shaped by the position in which you slept. Right side up, good dreams, left side down, odd ones. On your back, terrible nightmares. You're not sure if anyone really believed that, but it still crosses your mind every time you roll over. You choose your side now. The same one you always do. It's not scientific. It just feels right. It always has. You wonder how many others are doing the same at this very moment. Somewhere in Bloomsbury, a banker adjusting his bed socks. In Yorkshire, a child whispering to the doll beside her pillow. In Bath, an elderly woman checking the latch of her window one last time before retreating into a cocoon of flannel and faith in routine. You'll never meet them, but somehow you're joined. Because there's something profoundly communal about the act of sleep in this world. For all the solitary preparation, for all the individualized fussing and folding, this moment right here, this surrender, is shared. Like a city breathing inward. And tomorrow, this same body will rise again. It will pour the tea, lace the boots, fetch the paper, endure the drafts, write the letters, and chase the daily performance of Victorian respectability. But not now. Now, nothing is expected of you. No opinion to hold, no corset to tighten, no conversation to navigate. Just the slow unravelling of awareness, like a page curling inward at the edges. You let out one last sigh, not because you're troubled, but because you're done, and the sigh says everything you need it to, that the day has been met, that the rituals were followed, that the cold was kept at bay, that even in this complicated, corseted, constantly cautious world, you found a way to rest. And that, in the end, is a kind of quiet victory. And now, with the last candle long extinguished, and the final layer of thought folded away, you lie there, still, slow, wrapped in your own rhythm. The weight of the covers no longer presses but holds, like the hand of someone who knows you're safe. The air against your cheek is neither warm nor cool, just steady, familiar. The tick of the clock no longer counts time. It counts distance, gently carrying you away from the worries of the day. Everything that had to be done is already done. You lit the fire, you warmed the bricks, you arranged your nightdress and placed the shawl just so. You followed the curious little habits that thousands before you have practiced night after night, not because they were fashionable, but because they worked. Because even a life full of rigid etiquette and itchy wool can still offer a kind of peace, one that isn't loud or grand, but tender, earned. And now it's your turn to drift into the hush. No need to move, no need to think. Just allow yourself to float in that slow, delicious slide into nothing, like lace slipping off a hook, like tea cooling in the cup, like the sound of a page turning in a book that knows it doesn't need to end. Let your mind soften. Let your breath settle. Let the story sink into the pillow with you. You've done enough. Sleep is ready.